Welcome back to In Response EDH. As always, I'm your host Albert, and I'm glad you can join us for another great Commander gameplay video. On today's episode, we have a new friend joining us, Derek, and he's brought with him Ixhel, ᴍᴜᴜᴜᴜ. This is an infect deck that really benefits from distributing poison counters in order to exile cards from the top of our decks and lets him play them. He decides to keep an opening hand of Viridian Corruptor, ⴍᴜᴜᴜᴜ, Grateful Apparition, the Great Henge, Fumigate, Temple of Silence, and the Plains. Next we have Pax returning, and he's brought one of the most interesting colorless commanders, Liberator, Urza's Battlethopter. The name of the game is casting powerful artifacts and colorless creatures at flash speed with his commander. He starts the game with Glaring Spotlight, Thran Dynamo, Mystic Forge, Ugin the Spirit Dragon, Mystifying Maze, and 2 Wastes. Elly is also back, and has brought with her a commander I never even knew existed, Queen Allenal. This is a token commander that employs tons of ways to assemble a huge token army and some anthem effects to push through a lot of damage. She starts off with Esper Sentinel, Essence Warden, Teferi's Protection, Dr. John Seward, Avenger of Zendikar, and 2 Forests. And of course, there's me. And I'm also playing a token deck led by Ghired Conclave Exile. This deck is filled with heavy hitters that I make token copies of and populate with my commander's ability. I choose to start the game with Kodama's Reach, Swiftfoot Boots, Sakura Tribe Elder, Iroas God of Victory, Doubling Season, a Forest, and a Plains. Before we get started, we would like to remind you, if you enjoy our content and would like to support the channel, consider becoming a patron. When you do, you're not only contributing to the channel's growth, but you're also being entered in our monthly giveaways, as well as receiving patron-only perks. All proceeds of our Patreon are reinvested back into the channel to bring you the best content possible. We would also like to thank our sponsor, Dragon Shield. Hit the link in the description of this video to check out the best product out there to protect your cardboard. You can also support the channel by using our affiliate link when purchasing product and singles at TCG Player. With that said, and the introductions out of the way, let's start the game. Pax runs a die roll and leads us off by playing a Waste. He then taps it and casts a Glaring Spotlight. Derek draws a card and drops a Temple of Silence on the field. He then scries the top card and chooses to put it on the bottom of his deck. I then draw for turn and just play a Forest and pass. Elly plays a Forest and taps it to cast an Essence Warden. Pax then draws and puts down another Waste. He then casts a Guardian Idol, and after that, he passes. Derek draws for turn and puts down a Plains. He then taps out to cast a Night's Whisper to draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. He then discards down to 7 and passes to me. I drop a Plains on the field and tap both lands to cast Sakura Tribe Elder. I immediately sacrifice Steve in search of a tapped mountain onto the field. Elly then starts her turn and just plays a Forest and passes. Pax then draws for turn and plays a Mystifying Maze as his land drop. He then taps out to cast Thran Dynamo. After that, he passes to Derek. Derek draws for turn and plays a Karn's Bastion. He then taps 3 to cast ⴍᴜᴜᴜᴜ, which enters with 1 charge counter. He then taps the ⴑⴜᴜᴜᴜ for green mana to cast a Venerated Rot Priest. As it enters, Elly gains a life. I then draw a card and play another Forest. I then tap 3 to cast Kodama's Reach and go searching for a Plains to put on the battlefield tapped and a mountain to my hand. Elly then plays a Plains as her land drop and taps it to cast Esper Sentinel. As it enters, she gains another life. On her end step, Pax taps the Dynamo to cast his commander, Liberator, Urza's Battlethopter. He then moves to his turn and draws a card. Pax then drops down a Crystal Grotto. As it enters, he chooses to scry a card to the bottom of his library. He then moves to combat and swings at Elly, who chooses not to block and takes 1 commander damage. Pax then passes. Derek then starts his turn and taps out to cast his commander, Ixhel, ᴍᴜᴜᴜᴜ. Derek then goes to combat and swings his Rot Priest at Pax.
Me?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yeah.
I can flash speed something.
Okay.
I will then. Flash out. 10 up Spider, 4/4.
I can't
Block that.
The spider will then trigger the Liberator, and it puts a 1/1 counter on itself. After that, Derek passes. I then draw for turn, and tap out to cast Doubling Season. I make the mistake of not playing my land for turn beforehand, because now I can't pay the Sentinel tax, and Elly draws a card. Elly then starts her turn by playing a Reliquary Tower. She then pays 3 to cast Dr. John's Sword, gaining a life as it enters. After that, she ends her turn. Pax then draws for turn, and moves straight to combat. He chooses to swing his commander at me, and with nothing else, just passes. Derek then drops a Temple of Malady as his land for turn. He then scries 1, and leaves it on top. After that, he goes to combat, and swings Ixhel at Elly for 2 commander damage. She then receives 2 poison counters, and on his second main phase, he casts a Drown in Ichor, targeting Pax's commander, and not paying for the Esper Sentinel. In response, Pax casts a Mystic Forge, also refusing to pay for the Sentinel tax. This will trigger the Liberator, and it gets another counter. He then looks at the top of his library with the Forge, and casts the top card, which is an Ebony Fly. He then looks at the top of his library again, and then taps 1 to cast a Wayfarer's Bauble. He cannot grow his commander anymore, and it dies to the spell. Derek then chooses to proliferate on his Cornucopia, and Elly's poison counters. He then follows that up by casting a Grateful Apparition, and Elly remembers to gain a life. He then moves to his end step, and since Elly now has 3 poison counters, Derek exiles the top of Elly's library. I then start my turn and play a Sunpetal Grove as my land drop. I then tap 5 to cast my commander, Ghired, Conclave Exile. As he enters, I make 2 4/4 Rhinos thanks to the Doubling Season. After that, I tap my last 2 mana to cast Swiftfoot Boots, not paying for the Esper Sentinel, and Elly draws a card. She then draws for turn and plays a Gaia's Cradle. She then taps the Cradle for 3 green mana to pay for an Imperious Perfect. This will trigger her Dr. John, which will make her a 1/1 human with training and gain her 2 life when they enter. She follows that up by casting a Johnny the Greathearted to give all her creatures vigilance, and puts a 1/1 counter on each of them. Paxton starts turn 6 by playing an Urza's Mine as his land drop. He then uses the Forge to look at the top card of his library. He doesn't like what he sees and pays 1 life to exile it. He then looks at the next card, which is a Moonsilver Key. He then casts it, and Elly draws a card. He immediately activates it to sacrifice it and search up a Soul Ring. He then casts it. He then taps the Soul Ring to sacrifice the Wayfarer's Bauble to search up another waste to the battlefield tapped. He then looks at the top card again, and with nothing else, just ends his turn. Derek draws and plays a Swamp as his land for turn. He then taps 2 to cast Necrogen Communion, enchanting his Grateful Apparition. He doesn't pay the tax, and Elly draws a card. Next, Derek goes to combat and swings both creatures at me. I take 3 damage and get 4 poison counters. Then the apparition will proliferate, giving me and Elly another poison counter, and the Cornucopia another charge counter. He also decides to be nice to Elly and allows her to proliferate on all her creatures. After that, he taps out to cast Phyrexian Swarmlord, and Elly gains another life as it enters. Derek then goes to his end step and exiles the top card of Elly in my library. I then draw for turn and cast a Garruk's Uprising, not paying for the Sentinel, and drawing a card as it enters. I then put a Cinderglade into play, followed by equipping Ghired with the boots. After that, I cast Iroas, God of Victory. Next I go to combat and swing my commander and my 2 rhinos at Derek. This will trigger my commander, and I populate another rhino tapped and attacking, and another one with the Doubling Season not attacking. Since 2 creatures with power 4 enter the battlefield, this triggers the Garruk's Uprising, and I draw 2 cards. Derek decides to block my commander and a rhino and takes 8 damage. I just pass after that. Elly then plays a plains, and then taps 1 to cast a Soul Ring. As I remind her, she should have gained 2 life from the tokens entering. Next she taps her Cradle for 5 green mana to help pay for Karametra, God of Harvest, and gains 1 life when it enters, since it enters as a creature. She then uses some of her floating mana and the Soul Ring to cast a Crossing Grip on Pax's Spider. Next she uptakes Ajani to gain 3 life, going up to 58. And then activates the Imperious Perfect to make an Elf Warrior token and gain another life. Before she passes, Pax flashes in his commander again, and Elly gains another life. Pax then moves to his turn and draws a card, followed by casting Ugin the Spirit Dragon. He decides to -6 to wipe the board clean of any colored permanents CMC 6 and under. With the board now cleared, he taps 4 to cast Traxos, Scourge of Krug. After that, he goes to combat and swings his commander at me for 3 more commander damage. With nothing else, he ends his turn. Derek then starts his turn, casting Vat Emergence. Unfortunately for him, most of the good targets were exiled, and he just chooses the Canoptic Spider and Pax's graveyard. He then proliferates his Mana Rock, my poison counter, but not Elly's, or Pax's Ugin. After that, he casts the Great Henge. I then draw for turn and cast a Soul Ring, followed by a ᴑɪᴱᴏ Elder. I then pay 1 to equip it with the boots, and then tap it for green and white mana, and the rest of my mana to recast my commander. When it enters, I make another Rhino, and then play a Jetmir's Garden as my land for turn. With nothing else, I end my turn. Elly then starts her turn, tapping 3 for a Champion of Lambholt, and follows that up by casting Maja, Bredegard Protector. This will trigger the champion, and it gets a 1/1 counter. She then plays her land for turn, triggering the Maja, making a 1/1 human warrior, which will also trigger the champion again. Pax then starts turn 8, paying 3 for the Chief of the Foundry, and untapping the Scourge. He then pays a life, and taps the Foundry to exile the top card of his library. After that, he casts a Mind's Eye from the top of his deck, and putting another counter on his commander. Next he goes to combat and swings at Derek, who just chumps with Pax's creature. On his second main, he activates Ugin and just shoots Elly for 3. Derek draws and plays a forest. When Derek draws, Pax pays 1 for the Mind's Eye and also draws a card. After that, Derek decides it's already time to reset the board and cast a Fumigate. In response, I cast Flawless Maneuver to give my creatures indestructible. The Fumigate then resolves and wipes everyone else's creatures off the field, and Derek gains 6 life. Next, he recasts his commander, and it comes in with a 1/1 counter, and he draws a card thanks to the Henge. Pax pays another 1 to also draw a card. Derek then moves to his end step and exiles the top card of Elly in my library again. He then remembers to gain 2 life from the Great Henge, and I start my turn, draw a card, and go straight to combat, swinging Ghired at Ugin, populating another Rhino, and swinging both at Derek. He blocks 1 and takes 4. On my second main phase, I cast a Rampaging Baloths, but unfortunately miss my land drop and pass. Elly then draws, and Pax pays 1 to also draw a card. He then looks at the top card again, and then Elly casts a Wiltleaf Liege, followed by tapping 3 to cast Cathar's Call, enchanting the Wiltleaf Liege. She then moves to her end step and creates a 1/1 white human. Pax then draws for turn and looks at the top of his library, but before he casts it, he brings out his commander again. After that, he casts a Metalwork Colossus for free, and this will put another counter on his Liberator. Pax then uptakes Ugin, dealing 3 damage to Elly, then casting a Thought Vessel off the top of his library. He then looks at the top card again and just passes. Derek then draws a card, and decides to finally cast one of my exiled cards, a Vandal Blast.
Oh, destroy artifacts.
No. Just the one.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I'll be out of the game.
I'll get rid of that.
Battlethopter?
Back with her again?
Yeah.
He then casts Elly's Soul Warden, drawing a card and putting a counter on it. He then ends his turn, and again exiles a couple of Elly and my cards. After that, I draw and tap 4, floating a colorless mana, to cast ᴚᴚᴚᴚ. I then use that 1 floating mana to equip the boots to ᴚᴚᴚᴚ. Next I go to combat and make a deal with Elly to swing Ghired at her in order to populate and attack Derek. Elly draws for turn, and Pax then pays 1 to also draw a card. Elly then plays a Windswept Heath and cracks it, losing a life, to search up a savanna to the battlefield. She then pays 3 green mana to cast a Circle of Dreams Druid. When it enters, Derek gains a life thanks to her Soul Warden, and another when she goes to her end step, when she makes another human. Pax then starts turn 10, dropping a waste on the field, and looking at the top card of his library. He then taps 6 to cast that card, which is a duplicate. As it enters, he chooses to exile the Soul Warden, but Derek does gain a life before the creature gets exiled. He then upticks ugin again, and chooses to shoot Derek for 3. Pax continues his turn by paying a life to exile the top card of his library. He then looks again, and doesn't like what he sees, so he casts a Solemn Simulacrum to search up another basic and shuffle it away. He then moves to combat and continues picking on Derek, hitting him with the Metalwork Colossus. He then follows that up with casting an Unwinding Clock. On his end step, Derek taps his Great Hinge just to gain 2 life. He then starts his turn, and Pax untaps all his artifacts. Derek then plays a Bojuka Bog and chooses to exile Pax's graveyard. He then casts my Trailblazer's Boots from exile, and Pax pays another life to exile the top of his library. Derek then pays to attach them to his commander, and then he goes to combat and swings at ugin. But Pax wants to keep him around a little longer, so he uses his Mystifying Maze to try and take it out of combat. In response, Derek casts a Heroic Intervention from his exile pile to give his commander hexproof. This allows his commander to get through and knock ugin down to 2 loyalty. After that, he goes to his end step, and I activate my ᴚᴚᴚᴚ to make a 0/1 egg token. After that, I cast a second Harvest to double the amount of tokens I control. I then untap, and so does Pax. I draw a card, and then Pax also pays 1 to draw a card as well. I then move to combat and swing Ghired at Derek and populate a Rhino, and swing my creatures at ugin to try and take it off the field. Pax blocks to kill 1 with the Colossus, and the Solemn to draw a card. The rest will get through and finally take out ugin. On my second main, I play a Forbidden Orchard as my land for turn, triggering my Rampaging Baloths and creating a 4/4 beast token. With nothing else, I end my turn. Elly then untaps and draws, and so does Pax. She then casts an Avenger of Zendikar, making 8 plant tokens as it enters. She then plays a land and puts a 1/1 counter on each of those plants. After that, she taps the Druid for a bunch of green mana and taps a few more lands to cast Finale of Glory, where X equals 15. This will make her 15 4/4 angels, and now I'm regretting taking down the ugin. She then moves to her end step and makes another 1/1 human. Pax is up and draws for turn, and then looks at the top of his library again. He starts off by casting a Steel Overseer. He then follows that up by kicking a Myriad Construct, which will come in with 11 counters on it for each non-basic land an opponent controls.
I'm sorry, Elly. All is dust.
In response, Derek proliferates with his Karn's Bastion, putting another charge counter on his mana rock and another poison counter for Elly and I. After that, I respawn by activating ᴚᴚᴚᴚ to make another egg token. I then pass priority to Elly, who responds by casting a timely Teferi's Protection to save her from the board wipe. The All is Dust will then resolve, and my eggs will die, and I reveal 3 creatures from the top of my library, the first being Kamahl, Heart of Krosa, God Eternal Oketra, and lastly, a Birds of Paradise. Pax now moves to his combat phase and swings at Derek for 11, dropping him down to 12. Derek then draws for turn, and recasts his commander again, to hopefully find some answers off the top of our libraries. Pax then pays a life to exile the top card of his library again. Derek goes to his end step and exiles a couple more cards off me and Elly's library. I draw for turn, and Pax again pays 1 to draw as well, and then looks at the top card of his library again, but decides to pay 1 life to exile it.
Seeing if I can kill
Someone?
some people.
Well, I would suggest just see how it goes.
Just see how it goes?
Yeah. What?
Just pass the turn and
You know what? I'm gonna trust you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna trust you.
well, I can't save any of you. That's the thing.
Wow.
I don't know if I can.
Swing it.
I know.
Albert, just do you.
I then use Kamal to start animating 4 of my lands into 1/1 elementals. I then move to combat, and all my creatures get +3/+3 in trample. I swing my lands and the bird at Derek to take him out of the game, and Kamal and ᴑᴇᴜ at Pax. He just blocks with his 2 biggest creatures, killing mine and sending ᴑᴇᴜ 3rd from the top of my library. Now that I'm done kamikazing, Pax flashes in his commander again. Elly then draws for turn, and Pax exiles the top card of his library again. Elly then plays a land for turn, triggering the Avenger Zendikar, and putting another counter on each plan token.
Fuck it, why not? We'll cast my commander.
After that, she goes to combat.
30, yeah. So, boop. So I'll just send those to you. Everything else in the universe is coming at Pax.
Cool. In response, before damage is dealt, flash in Platinum Empyrean. My life total cannot change. I got a counter. Saving what I dig it, man. I've been digging. Oh, here.
Alright.
And I am dead.
Okay.
She then goes to her end step and makes another 1/1 human. Pax starts his turn, drawing a card, and then casts.
Forsaken Monument.
What does it do?
All my corner creatures get +2/+2.
Yeah.
Cool.
I can make all my creatures unblockable by sacrificing my Glorious Spotlight I cast on turn 1.
Wow.
Let's see if it's enough.
This will grow his commander, and after that, pays 4 to activate the Ebony Fly, and rolls a 6, which makes the fly 6/6.
So now I'm gonna blow this up.
Okay.
All my creatures are now unblockable.
Next, he activates the Steel Overseer to put a 1/1 counter on each artifact creature he controls. He then goes to combat, swinging 55 damage at Elly.
Holy
And
crap.
you swing and you're in.
Oh my lord.
Pulled it off
See,
with the
that
Platinum
was the
Imperium.
easier way to say it, to do the math. There you go.
Congratulations, Pax, on getting your first win on the channel. This win was nothing short of amazing. We all thought that Elly was just going to steamroll us on her turn, but that Mystic Forge proved invaluable by allowing Pax to dig deep into his library and find the Platinum Empyrean that saved the day, then finding the Forsaken Monument to buff them up, rolling a 6 for the Ebony Fly, and then pumping them up even more with the Steel Overseer. It just seemed like everything came together perfectly for this win. My Ghired deck performed decently. I didn't really find too many payoff creatures, but I was still able to get an engine going. It didn't last too long though, since Pax's Ugin came down and wiped the board. I wasn't the only one set pretty far back by board wipes though. Elly had to keep rebuilding hers over and over again, but that Teferi's protection that saved her board was clutch. After that, we all just thought we were dead. Derek said after the game, he thinks he was being too nice, and he may be right. The board wipes were also setting him back, but instead of proliferating with the Karn's Bastion a few more times to kill Elly and I through infect, he had spent his turns recasting his commander. If you enjoyed this game, consider stopping by our Twitch streams for Salty Tier Tuesdays every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and Fridays at 7 Pacific Standard Time for live commander action. Make sure to like the video and leave a comment, and if you aren't already subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Before we go, we'd like to give a big thank you to our amazing patrons. We are glad to have your support and thankful for each and every one of you. We here at In Response would like to thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure you follow us on our social medias. We also stream every Friday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for watching. Have an awesome day.